Welcome everyone tonight. I think this is our third class of Hinduism, fourth class overall. So remember we talked about different eras of Hinduism. There was the pre-Hindu era in the Indus River Valley, which was in the northwest corner of India. Pardon me. And up there was this Indus River Valley civilization that was especially marked by the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. In fact, it becomes known as the Harappan civilization after a while. Then there was, and that was before 2000 BC. Then there was the period called the Vedic period, which was 1500 to 500 BC. That was when the period is when the Vedas started being written. The Hindu scriptures started being written. So last time we started with the epic era, or the Puranic era, or sometimes called the classical age. So at this point, we start seeing Hindu beliefs starting to be defined. They are starting to now come together instead of different small sects all across northern India. Now they're starting to communicate with each other. The writings are helping people to start unifying their beliefs. And we had talked a good deal about the writings last time. So we want to look at some of the basic ideas of Hinduism. First off, Hinduism actually embraces a lot of different religious ideas. So for that reason, sometimes Hinduism isn't even called a religion. It's kind of called a way of life, or even sometimes referred to as a family of religions. Well, but if we're going to say that, then we would have to say the same thing about Christianity and about everything else, because there's so many, what's the number, 33,000 denominations or something like that. And all of them are so close to each other that it kind of looks like these two really should be named together, but no. For whatever reason, people found a way to start expressing themselves differently. Well, it's no different with Hinduism. Some of them are wanting to really kind of focus more on this particular thing than on that particular. So you wind up with two different, we'll call them denominations just because we know that word. So it's not a single organized religion. You meet a Hindu who is from Benares, India, and then meet a Hindu who is from Mumbai, India, and then meet a Hindu who's from Houston, Texas. You got different kinds of Hinduism going on there. So all of these things we kind of wrap up and call Hinduism. So most of the forms of Hinduism, though, are what we call henotheistic. All right? Henotheistic is not really believing in one God. Okay, monotheism is the belief in one God, right? But here we have to refer to them as henotheistic because while there may be many names for God, the people pick one. They will follow one. They will follow Krishna or Vishnu or Shiva or Kali or any of the others like that. And so there may be other gods or other names for God, but we're sticking with this one. So henotheistic. Truth of the matter is, the earliest form of the Hebrew religion, before it even became known as Judaism, the earliest form of the Hebrew religion was like that. We always think of Judaism and the Hebrew religion as being monotheistic, only one God. But that's not really the case. What history shows us, and the texts show us, is that, yeah, the Hebrews believed that there were other gods, but they are only going to worship Yahweh, one God. Think about the very first commandment. You shall have no other gods before my face. Or we translated it as no other gods before me. The actual Hebrew phrase is before my face, meaning you better not be picking any of these others and let me see you doing it. That's kind of the feeling you get there. And as we get farther along, Judaism will finally say there's only one God, especially when we get to, for example, Isaiah chapters 1 through 39, and Hosea, Amos, Micah. Those, the earliest of the prophets, they're the ones who really start talking about, nope, there's really only one God. The rest of them are just jokes. They don't even exist. Think about when who is it? Elisha was confronting the priests of Baal, and he was like, really? Well, let's just see who really does have a God. And so they build this huge sacrifice, build this fire, and it was like, now, Elisha says, if your God is really all that great, then let him put this fire out. And all these priests of Baal, they go tearing off their clothes. They're doing all kinds of stuff, plucking out their beards, doing anything to get their God to do it. Nothing happens. And so then Elisha just simply says, Lord, I know you hear me. Prove to these guys that there's only one God in Israel. Oh, there's a thunderstorm, and all the fire is extinguished. And then, of course, there's the fire that then comes after it that actually laps up the water and consumes everything. And Elisha, he's like, hey, where's that God of yours? I thought you guys said that you had a great God. You haven't been able to do anything with this. So, and then he goes off and kills them in good religious fashion. So just so you don't forget, I'll kill you while you've just learned this thing. So, you have with these Hindus, I always thought, and I think I've probably told you this before, that they all believe in 33 million gods. I think that's the number. And I asked a Hindu one time, really, do you really? And he was like, no, we only believe in one God. No, you don't, because there's Krishna, Vishnu, Ishwara, Kali, Shiva, all the rest of those. And I said, I can name a handful without breaking a sweat. And he goes like, yeah, no, we only believe in one God. I don't understand. He said, we think that God is so magnificent, so wonderful, that it takes 33 million expressions to even begin to understand God. Oh, okay, I can buy that. Again, thankful that we only believe in a Trinity. I can name 3 pretty quick, but 33 million is right out. So the Hindus, some of their chief doctrines was, number one, was this belief called samsara. Samsara is, you'll see Hinduism sometimes will be represented. Think about the flag of India. I should have put that on there. But the flag of India has got the, orange on top, white in the middle, and green on the bottom, or vice versa. But in the middle, you see a wheel. And it kind of looks like a helm from an old, wooden ship, with sails and all like that. That wheel is the wheel of samsara. They believe that is the wheel of existence. We are caught on this wheel, and we just keep going around and around on it. How? Well, they believe that when you die, you're going to come back. You're going to be reincarnated. And so what Hinduism is really looking for is some way to get off of that wheel and just kind of be blown out. But based on how you've lived your life, based on all of that stuff, you are probably going to come back. Now, you have what's called, and we talked about this, the Dharma, which is their view of the law of your life. It's your duty, is one good word. And again, remember I told you about the Hindu religious text called the Bhagavad Gita. And in that text, a prince named Arjuna is talking with his chariot driver, who happens to be Krishna in disguise. And so he's saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go fight. I don't want to leave my people in war. I don't want to die. I don't want my people to die. I don't even want the enemy to die. And so it's all, why am I doing this in life? And Krishna, in disguise, tells him, because it's your dharma. You were born into this life. You were born into this class. We'll talk about it a little bit later. You were born into this, and it is the duty of your life to do that. Sorry you don't like it. You got to do it. All right. Kind of like being born as a farmer's kid. You may not like it, but you're going to work on the farm. You might get away from it at some point, but you might take over the family business. That's your dharma. My dad was a minister. His dad was a minister. His father's father was a minister. It goes back, I think I'm number 6. And I just like, this is way too much pressure. I mean, I was having to go to church all the time. And when I say all the time, I'm not kidding. I mean all the time. It was like the comedian Steve Harvey said that he had to go to church on Monday night, which was deacon's meeting. Tuesday night was choir practice. Wednesday night, midweek service. Thursday night, prayer service. Friday night, young people service. Saturday night, teachers meeting. Sunday morning and Sunday night, everybody's meeting. And like he told his mother, you know, I think I'd rather go to hell. It's just way too much pressure here. Yeah, it kind of felt like that. So early on, I was kind of told, yeah, you may think you're going to teach in a university or someplace, but nope, it's the ministry for you. And well, I did for a little while, and then went and taught in colleges and seminaries and stuff, and look where I am now. Back, you know, I'm going to wrap up my life where they always told me I would end up my life. Hopefully, if we were Hindus, that would all mean that I'm fulfilling my dharma. What that is also is that there's that phrase that sounds a lot like dharma called karma. And that just means the good or bad acts that you do that will have an effect on how you come back. If you have fulfilled the dharma of your life and you have built up these good acts called karma, then you should get good acts back. You should get something good coming in the life to come. So if you're born in, say, that there was 4 official classes of society, but there was actually a 5th one, but they were just outside of it all. If you were in one of those classes and you did well, and you fulfilled all of your dharma, and you did good acts, and you did all the stuff you were supposed to, then when you come back a step higher. Don't think I ever heard of anybody skipping a step, because you're going to be coming back a lot of times. So every time likewise, if you don't do what you're supposed to, and if you treat people badly, and you build up this bad karma, you can come back lower. And then lower the next time. Theoretically, you could come back as a rock. Now, I don't understand how you could be a good or bad rock. It just seems like you're just stuck there for the rest of the time. But
someone throws you into a window.
As long as nobody flings you into a window, then you're okay. And the next time you come around, but you can also come back as an angelic being or a demonic being or something like that. They have all these different levels that you could possibly come back as. That's a big deal for them. So they want to do what's right. They're terrified of doing what's wrong. And what's wrong? Well, they want to be careful about eating certain animals, because that just might be Uncle Billy, who, wasn't so good last time, and he's come back as a pig. So you want to be careful about that. They have certain animals. The cow is considered a sacred animal. You don't eat that. So a lot of Hindus are vegetarians. That's why they rely so much on beans and lentils and other stuff like that. Yeah, sure, you can go into an Indian restaurant and you can get chicken and pork and beef and that kind of stuff. But as far as a strict Hindu, most of the time, no. They're going to stay away from that kind of stuff, mostly because of the reasons that we just talked about. So they're wanting to do better for the next life, but the best thing is just to get off that wheel altogether. They don't have a whole lot of recipes for getting off that wheel. That's going to be the Buddhists. The Buddhists are going to come along in somewhere in the 6th century BC, and the Buddha is going to say, wait a minute, I got an idea. I know how we can get off this. Which is why so many of them, so many Hindus converted to Buddhism, because the Buddha was showing them a way off of this thing. Okay. So they as far as they're concerned, karma is cause and effect. And you hear people say it all the time. Oh, karma's going to get you. John Lennon wrote a song, called Instant Karma. That, be careful of that. It can come back and get you right this second. Most of the time, they're talking about waiting until your next life for you to get it. But make no mistake, it can get you at any time. So they thought about the human soul. They called the soul the Atman. The Atman is the soul as we think of it, and it kind of says that all living, breathing creatures have a soul. Well, now this is, of course, they found out that plants can breathe, so that's again why they don't like the idea of eating any kind of animal. They're afraid of the soul there. Now, when we think about like the Old Testament, and remember, we were counseled in the Old Testament, do not consume the blood of any living thing, because that is where the nefesh, sometimes translated as soul, more appropriately the life force, that's where the life force exists. So while the Old Testament wasn't saying don't eat meat, it was definitely saying don't drink the blood from any kind of creature. So the Hindus are saying no blood, no meat, just don't do it, because you don't want to consume the soul of something else. And actually, all of these creatures and all of these Atman, all these souls, they consider to be part of the great soul. Also sounds a little familiar to us that, we talk about in the New Testament that, when the soul departs, it becomes one with God. We have so many other religions who will follow the very same thing, that we are all part of this one universal soul. Now, the Hindus would say Brahman, who is the one God, who is above it all. And Brahman really just means existence. Well, wouldn't you know it, if you find out what the name Yahweh means in the Hebrew Bible, it means I am. It means existence. So the Hebrew word and the Hindu or Sanskrit word are really very close to each other. Both of them believe that there is one great eternal soul, and we come from it and go back to it. So that's the Hindus for all that. They also believe that what they want to achieve is some kind of salvation of their soul, and they call it moksha. Moksha is simply the end of the cycle of rebirths. Now, the Buddhists are going to call it something else that we hear a lot, called nirvana. But that just really means a blissful disappearance. All right. For the Hindus, this moksha, this salvation, means you become one with the universal soul again. One of the really fundamental principles of the religion is, again, that people's actions and thoughts will directly determine what happens in this life, but more importantly, what happens in the next life. Okay, that's karma that we talked about. So following the law, dharma, following good actions, karma, will eventually lead to this salvation, right? And food is an extremely important part. Well, yeah, for us too. I mean, imagine a service without the possibility of a potluck afterwards. It's important to us. I'm not saying it leads to salvation, but not having it, it leads to salvation. probably leads to damnation. So, so you want to make sure that we get the potlucks in there. So they, again, no pork, no beef, nothing like that. They're all good vegetarians. And they're also close to so many other religions that we find in India. Of course, there's Buddhism that we're going to talk in greater detail about after Judaism. There's also one called Sikhism, and that's S-I-H-K, or K-H.
That's like KH.
K-H, yeah. I used to call it Sikh, which I thought it was, until I met one, and he goes, no, we're Sikh. And I'm like, how am I not supposed to laugh at that? I mean, he goes, I know, go ahead, get it out of your system. I don't know, if you know what's coming, forget it. So the Sikhs, they're the guys that you see with the turbans. We always think of turbans as being Muslims. They're not. Muslims don't wear, they'll wear a kafia, you know, the head scarf with the band around it that holds it in place. And the women in Islam wear what's called the hijab. But for the Sikhs, it is this. And I have a good friend who is a Sikh. And he was like, and I was like, do you ever take that thing off? And he goes, well, yeah, sure. And I'm like, I mean, do you sleep in it? No. I'm like, well, sorry to be ignorant, but why you wear this thing all the time? Oh, well, because it's part of the, you know, the vow that we take to hide our hair away. I said, you and not the women? And he goes, yeah, it's for us. Why? Okay. I said, well, could you take it off now? And he goes, if you want me to. I'm like, I'm curious. I want to see. Holy smokes. He took this turban off and hair kept rolling out. And I'm like, are you sure you're not the source of the Rapunzel story? I mean, because I could climb up your back just holding on to this. And he was like, well, that's part of our thing too. And I'm like, wait a minute. Is this like the Samson story? And he goes, no, I know the Samson story. And no, it's not like that. And he goes, but that's part of our devotion is we are not supposed to be looking good, trying to look good, trying to look, you know, super attractive and all like that. He said, you know, we got great hair and we hide it. I'm like, you don't know how sad that makes me. If I had hair like that, I'd be showing it off. And he goes, see, that's why we can't do it. I'm like, okay. So it's a lot about humility, and it's a lot about that. And we'll come back around. We'll talk about the Sikhs later on. But they are sweet people, kind people, and so sad when in Milwaukee 6, 7, 8 years ago, I don't remember exactly now, there was that mass murder in the Sikh temple there. Okay, I don't think anybody really has it coming like that. There's some that you kind of, you know, you're not that sad. Like if it happened to Nazis or New York Yankees fans or something like that. You know, you're kind of like, kind of had it coming. But, you know, for these people who are so gentle and so kind and so sweet, yeah, absolutely horrifying. Or thinking about the Birmingham church where the 6 little girls were in the basement there. Horrifying. Well, so these folks are very closely attached with the Hindus. Sometimes they're even confused, or I should say mistaken for Hindus. But no, you see a turban, it's a Sikh. And then after the Sikhs, there's another group called the Jains. The Jains, it looks like Jains, not Jains, but Jain. The Jains are people who take this very strict vow of what they call ahimsa, which is don't injure. It is said that they will even walk down the street with a broom in front of them, sweeping the sidewalk in front of them because they don't want to step on a bug. They say that they actually strain all the drink that they take because they don't want to accidentally drink a bug. Good plan. I mean, I'm all for that. And apparently in India, there's a bigger probability of that happening than for us. So they don't want to hurt anything. They are so well trusted in India that the Jains are the ones who become the biggest bankers because they've taken a vow, and they mean it, not like vows that get taken over here. They've taken a vow, and the people know they're not going to cheat me. They're not going to rip me off. So the Jains are these kind people who don't want to hurt anybody, and they're also the richest people there in India because they are so well trusted. Yeah, and it's deserved. They really do take the not only not to hurt someone physically, not to hurt their reputation, not to hurt, kind of like Jesus was telling us, don't you call anybody a fool, don't you call anybody raka, don't you call anybody anything like that. It's the same notion. We don't hurt reputation, self-esteem, we certainly don't hurt physically, and we don't hurt anybody economically. So your money's safe there. Well, those are the other religions. So we're talking about with the Hindus, they also have certain symbols that we see there. The first one that you see is the swastika. The swastika it got a bad name starting about 1929 when a bunch of clowns in Munich decided to establish a new government. And where do they start? Well, if you're in Munich, you start in a beer hall. The Munich Beer Hall Revolt, or the German word was Putsch. That's where, and they adopt this as their symbol. Well, they got it kind of from the Tibetans, and the Tibetan swastika was considered a good luck charm. Same thing with the Hindus. The Hindus had it too. But you'll notice that on that one, it's kind of straight. The Nazi swastika will be bent to the side. I didn't include that picture because we're all very familiar with what that looks like. The other symbol that we see there is it's representative of Hinduism. Anytime you see, like if, for example, if somebody is using a symbol for Christianity, they use
fish.
A fish is actually a good one, but cross is more the one I'm thinking about. Christians would recognize what the fish is. Everybody else would think that it was, a certain season. And that's like Protestant Christianity. In like Celtic Christianity, you'll see a cross with kind of what looks like a halo behind the crosspiece. Or in Eastern Orthodoxy, you'll see the cross, but you'll see the little diagonal square at the bottom and the one up top. Those are supposed to represent the plate that Pilate had put above there that said, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. We'll see it written in as INRI, which is the Latin for Jesus Nazaratum Rex Eudorum. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And then the bottom plate, you know what that is. It's the footstool. So we have all these things. In Hinduism, they will show that sign that's there on your paper, the black and white sign. And it actually is the three Hindu or Sanskrit letters that represent what to them may be the most sacred word. And you've probably heard it in TV shows or it was even on the Monkees one time in the 1960s, where you hear them chant and they'll say, Om. Now, what that is supposed to be is the echo of the universe. That's their viewpoint for that. Is that, so you'll hear them chant that all the time because they think it's making them in tune with the sound of the universe. That's terrific. So we sometimes see it as OM, but it actually should be more like AUM. Anyway, and don't worry, you can say that it won't get you possessed or anything like that. So, I mean, people are sometimes worried about, can't say that, that's not Christian. That's all right. So we have those symbols there that are represented. And then there's places of worship that they will go to, like we have churches and shrines, really. Sometimes when we think of shrines, we're thinking of Shinto or something like that. But there's plenty of shrines all over the place. In Guadalupe, in Mexico, there's the Shrine of the Virgin there. Or in, what's the famous one in Portugal?
Field.
What's that?
Lambeau Field.
For some. Or at Notre Dame University, there's the Touchdown Jesus. Yeah. When you look through the goalpost, you see the statue of Jesus, making the sign of the touchdown. Actually, that's not what Jesus is supposed to be doing, but that's the name that got stuck. So Hindu worship is known as puja, and it takes place in a temple, a mandir. And people can go into the temple anytime they want to, and it's not restricted. I mean, I was able to go into a temple with a friend of mine, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. Now, Islam, on the other hand, nope, you don't. If you're not a Muslim, you don't go into the prayer place. In fact, when I was a student at Vanderbilt in the divinity school there, they had taken a room and made it specifically for the Muslims who were attending there to come and pray. So they would all bring in their prayer rugs and stuff like that. When I had first gotten there, I was like, hey, what's in here? And before they started to answer, I grabbed the doorknob and I had about 4 or 5 arms grabbing, pulling me away. No, you don't go in there. Well, now I really want to go. What's in there? Oh, that's the Muslim prayer room. Oh, okay. Well, thanks for pulling me out. So, yeah, it's only there that you're not allowed to go. You can go into a mosque or a madrasa, or which is like a Muslim school. You can go in there and visit all the places, but just in the prayer place, you don't go in there, especially during a time of prayer. So the Hindus, they can worship at home if they want to, and they do. They say their prayers. They say their. Don't you run off with that, Daryl. They can pray at home. They can pray any place. They may have their own special shrine that they go to, dedicated to one of their deities. And there's a lot of those in India. Some of them don't look like much. Some of them are just kind of a hole in a boulder. But there's something there that they want to go and visit. So when they are worshiping, and they will bring offerings, absolutely. And a lot of times they'll just simply present gifts in front of the altar. But the gifts are always something cool, like flowers, fragrant oils, all kinds of stuff like that. Sometimes food, sometimes drink that they will pour out also, kind of like we call it a libation, when the thing is poured out in sacrifice. But flowers and oils, how cool is that? But again, depending on the deity that we're talking about, Krishna, for example, is always shown, and Krishna is the God of compassion and mercy. And Krishna is always depicted as having flowers in his hair. He's depicted as being young, as being vibrant, as playing a flute. I mean, this is one of the most charming of the representations. Now, opposite to charming is Shiva, who destroys everything. So, yeah, can't really figure out why anybody would want to worship that guy. But it's actually, when you get to know it, kind of a good story too, because Shiva destroys everything because it needs to be rebuilt. When we get to the certain age when nothing but cruelty, nothing but betrayal, nothing but hatred, selfishness, all of that stuff rules the age, remember they called it the Iron Age or the Dark Age, then Shiva comes to say, let's just wipe it out and start it all over again. Sounds a lot like something that comes out of the book of Genesis, when God says, kind of tired of these people. I think we just need to start it all over again. So, okay, maybe not everybody. Noah, you and the 7 other members of your family, oh yeah, and all the critters in the world, get onto this boat because we're going to wipe it out and start all over again. But he didn't really start all over again. He started with what was already there. Started with Noah and the family. It's a cool thing, the way that story has impacted so much of the rest of the world. For example, and I'm sure I've told you this, but I'll tell you again. In Chinese kanji, which is pictures to symbolize words, they will have a certain picture, and it not like Egyptian. Egyptian, you see a picture and it represents a sound. In Chinese kanji, this picture represents the word itself. For example, and this is my favorite one, the picture for trouble is 2 women under one roof. And if you've ever seen a mother-in-law with a daughter-in-law under the same roof, yep, the Chinese experienced the very same thing. That's not true 100% of the time, but it was certainly true enough that the Chinese made a word out of it. But the word for flood in Chinese it's a picture of 8 people in one boat. Well, if you remember the story, there was Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives. 8 people. The story, told way back when, carried everywhere because every culture had a flood. Why? Because every culture was built on a riverbank. In China, the Yellow River, the Huanghe, it's the place where Chinese civilization begins. Egyptians begin along the Nile. The Babylonians and the Akkadians and the Sumerians begin along the Tigris and Euphrates River. All of the we're talking about India, and the Harappan culture begins along the Indus River Valley. So there's always floods to be contended with in all of these histories. And so flood stories come to be shared with each other, and symbols would be passed along as well. Okay, so there was also, not only do we have the temples, the mandirs, and the worship at home, and the worship in shrines, and worship in nature sites also. And then the worship of offerings through oils and flowers and stuff like that. They also believed in pilgrimages too. We think about in Christianity during the Middle Ages, everybody wanted to make a pilgrimage to Rome. Some people in the Eastern Orthodox Church wanted to make a pilgrimage to Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. And if you can't remember that, there's a really good song that goes along with it. Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. So if you have a girl in Constantinople, she'll be waiting in Istanbul. I was teaching history, and some of my students brought me this cassette, and they were like, "Mr. Rogers, you got to listen to this." I'm like, what? It's a story about a song about Constantinople. Now, what I didn't know, and they didn't know either, is that song was actually written like in the 1930s. Way back. And I heard just about a month ago a recording of somebody singing it way back then. Anyway, so they would go on these pilgrimages to temples or to other sites. There was a famous deer park in Benares, and they would go there because of all these deer that were protected by, edicts. And they could see all these deer that were there. Later on, the Buddha will actually go there and give one of his most famous sermons at that place, because it was a way that they kind of could commune with nature through animals, but also the great trees there, I think banyan trees, that were all there. And it was a thing of great reverence for them. So, talked about the 33 million gods. Not all of them, just mentioned that they were that many. So you have different, again, denominations or sects of Hinduism. And so some of the biggest ones, I have them listed there for you, is Shaivism, who were followers of the god Shiva. I told you about the destroyer. Then there's the Vaishnava, who were the followers of Vishnu. And then there was Shaktism, who were the followers of Devi. Remember we talked about the god Devi last time. And also Smarta, who were followers of Brahman, the big god, the one god. And other major deities who were wrapped into that one. It was kind of to think of it in Christian terms, these are the oneness people. They're the ones who believe that one God, forget the three-person stuff, there's only one God. They are like that. We only believe in Brahman, and yes, we can talk about the other major deities being a part of Brahman, but this is who we follow. So, there are actually some in Hinduism who will talk about a certain trinity, where three gods in particular, that's Brahman, the big one, and Vishnu and Shiva, the three of them are, because Shiva is kind of the, Vishnu is kind of the sustainer. Brahman is considered the creator. So you have the creator, the sustainer, and then the destroyer. These three were, you won't really hear Hindus talk about a word like Trinity, but it's along the same line where there are many in Hinduism who will acknowledge these three in particular and stay with them, worship the three of them. And then there's the belief among most of them that all of these, like I said, are just one God, one manifestation of one. There's a guy who is a brilliant young guy, and he's on YouTube. Goodness, I forgot his name. But anyway, he is always talking about Hindu beliefs, and he's always comparing them to Christianity too. And he was like, yeah, you guys believe this? That's okay. We believe that too. It's always something so compassionate, so loving, that you can see why it's compelling to some people. Especially when we start talking about in the 1960s, when people start looking for something else beside the church because they've been disappointed by the church, they've been hurt by the church, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, we've all been there. We got t-shirts made. We've all taken it on the chin in one point or another from the church. And so a lot of people, these youngsters in the teenagers, 20-somethings in the 60s, decided they wanted to follow after this because there was so much compassion and love and that kind of thing. Most famously, the Beatles went to India to meet with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and of course, when it was all over with, Ringo was the first to leave, and he was like, no, not for me. And eventually, John left and Paul left, but at the same time, there was the movie star Mia Farrow and her sister went along there. They wanted to learn all this stuff about Hinduism. They wanted to study transcendental meditation, another thing that was part of that. And they wanted to learn all this stuff. Well, Mia Farrow's sister decides that she just wants to stay in her room. She doesn't want to come out. And so John Lennon wrote a song to her telling her to come outside. The song was called Dear Prudence. It was, Mia Farrow's sister was named Prudence, and so he's saying, why don't you come out to play, was the phrase of it. Well, the one who stuck with it was George Harrison. George Harrison didn't really become a full-fledged Hindu, but he was so fascinated by it that he actually said toward the end of his life that it helped his Christianity. In what he saw with the compassion of Krishna and the energy and the love that was there, he said, that's who Jesus is supposed to be. That's who Jesus is right there. So with George, he kind of wound up blending the two, and it worked for him. So he said, he never gave up on Christ, but he sure gave up on the church. Okay. Again, we've all been smarted like that. So the one of the most remarkable and tragic things of Hinduism is called the caste system. I think that's on your page. In the caste system, you have different castes or social classes. And when you're born into that caste, you die in that caste. You can't marry somebody from a different caste. Okay, so at the bottom is the Shudras. Well, I think I listed them differently. Okay, we'll go from the top. The Brahmins, not to be confused with Brahman, the god. The Brahmins were the priestly caste. These were the spiritual leaders. These were the ones who, they didn't have to be priests necessarily, but they were instructors. They worked in universities, things like that. They were to be, the intellectuals. And so women, they were also born in this caste. So if you're a woman born in this caste, you marry a man in that caste. Your children are going to be in that caste. Your great-grandchildren are going to be in there. Because if you're born into it, that's where you spend the rest of your life. Now, remember, you do good, you do bad, you can come back lower or higher. So there's no such thing as social mobility among the Hindus. You're in a caste, that's where you stay. The next one are the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas is technically known as the warrior class. But they're the ones who wind up being the soldiers. Okay, remember the story I told you about the Bhagavad Gita with Prince Arjuna? Well, he's a Kshatriya. He has to fulfill that role. They're the police, they're the army. These guys are especially higher ups in the army. And they're the servants of society there. The ones under that are the Vaishyas, who are kind of like the merchants and the artisans. Then the last ones are the Shudras, and they're the ones who are kind of like the laborers. Not especially skilled, but okay, it could be worse. And it could be worse because the one that's not even considered to be a part of the system, they're outside the system altogether, are called the pariahs. Well, that's a word that we use, but the pariahs is actually called the untouchables. Not Elliot Ness, not those guys, but seriously, can't touch them. These are the guys who clean up dead bodies. They remove refuse from the sewage from the streets. They touch all these things. And if you wind up touching one of these, then you've got to go to the temple right now and go through a purification ritual. These poor guys, the untouchables, yep, your kid is going to be one of those. You want to marry somebody? Don't even go looking at one of the higher classes. I mean, you'll get whipped just for even looking at them. Yeah, we had things like that happening in this country once upon a time. Usually it was based around the color of a person's skin, looking at the wrong person, one who's not like you. So this whole system is known as the caste system. Now, you'll see some women with the red dot, right? That is a representation of them being a part of this caste system. Gandhi tried to get rid of it, and nope, it clung too tightly. It's not a legal separation now. I mean, the government doesn't enforce it, but it's so culturally embedded in anybody that you don't need the police to do it. They won't cross over between those lines. So the caste system really set in stone for you every detail of a person's life. Your social life, your professional life, your religious status in India, all of that was determined according to this caste that you're born into. But when India became independent in the late 40s, then the Constitution, thanks to Gandhi, really banned discrimination based on caste. Again, the law said that, but society acted a little bit differently. These days, is there still a caste system? Yeah, but it's really only kind of loosely followed. It's not that strict. In fact, you can even cross over in boundaries. Now, if you're born in one, you're going to stay in that one. But you can actually have relationship with people who are outside of that caste and in some others. But really, still, society is kind of tough on that. It's got to be the real liberal ones for them to ignore the castes when they're marrying. Well, they have certain holidays. They have a lot of them. We're only going to name a few. And one of them is called Diwali, which is probably the most famous. It's called the Festival of Lights. It's during that time also that you'll see, I don't know if you've ever watched it on the news or on a documentary, where you see colors being thrown all over the place. That looks like a barrel of laughs. I mean, yeah. And so a lot of times when people are talking about the differences in cultures and everything, they'll refer to phrases like the colors of India. Well, this is what they're talking about. There's the Navaratri, which is a celebration of the harvest and childbearing, all of that. Holi is a spring festival, which is kind of like the planting festival. Then there's the Krishna Janmashtami, which is a tribute to the day that Krishna was born. Okay, think of it as our Christmas. Is that the day when Krishna was born? No, but neither really is Christmas the day that Christ was born. But pick a day and celebrate. That's the fun of it. There's the Raksha Bandhan, which is a celebration between a brother and a sister, which in Indian society is something really sacred. It's that way with my sister and I. We just celebrate it in different ways. There's a very strong bond here that is celebrated, and that's why you hear stories sometimes that are rather disconcerting about certain acts of vengeance that are done by a brother in protection of his sister. So yeah, that was a big one. And then Shivaratri is, of course, Shiva. Well, that was all during the classical period. That was when all these doctrines really started to develop, these Hindu beliefs. They really then became widespread, passed around to everyone, and they started taking on real definition. Whereas before, it was all these little sects that were scattered all over the place, but now they're starting to really coalesce into larger groups. There's still a lot of them, but it's like there's a lot of Lutherans, there's a lot of Catholics, there's a lot of Baptists, there's a lot of Methodists, there's a lot of UCC, there's a lot of them, but they're bigger groups. They're very large groups, no matter how many there may be. If I start on the next section, it's going to keep you a few minutes. So I'll tell you what, we're going to actually have a part 4 of Hinduism. So have a look at the book and see what that says. And if it raises any questions for you, then absolutely bring them. Or if you have any questions now, we can talk about them. But next time, I promise, we will wrap up Hinduism.